Welcome along to today's Youth Enquiry Service Podcast. I'm Emily.
And I'm Liam. This month we'll be focusing on mental health and well-being, and we are delighted to be joined by Louise Cumbley, who is a clinical psychologist with NHS Dumfries and Galloway.
Welcome along, Louise. We are happy to have you with us today.
Hi, nice to see you.
To get us started, if you could be a cartoon character, who would you be and why?
So I had a long think about this, and actually I asked a couple of colleagues because it's really hard to think of it yourself. So I asked a colleague of mine, and she said she thought I was most like Lisa Simpson. So I know. So I was a bit like, I'm not sure about that. But she said, no. She said, you're kind, you're thoughtful. She said, but you're a real advocate and get really passionate about things, particularly people being treated fairly and equality. And I'm also a little bit dogmatic. And by that, I mean, I get a bit like a dog with a bone, and Lisa Simpson's a bit like that. So when she gets passionate about something, she starts lecturing everybody, doesn't she? I'm not quite as bad as that, but I do get a little bit passionate about things. So I think that probably suits me. What about you, Liam? What about you?
I think I'm Wally from the movie Wally. It's not as explained as yours, but probably just because he likes to tidy up and clean, and I like to do that.
Oh, he's a really nice character. I like him. What about you, Annie?
Mine would be Raven from Teen Titans because she's nice but she's also reserved and like dark gothic type of stuff.
Yeah. Nice, you've really thought about that. That's good.
Thank you. Can you tell us about what a clinical psychologist is and more about your role?
So that's a really good question. And it's one that I get asked when I see young people because they have absolutely no clue what I do. So a clinical psychologist is a mental health professional. So they've done a degree in psychology, and then they've done a doctorate in clinical psychology. So that means that we can offer specialist psychological therapies to people. So that's talking therapies, basically. So what we do is we help young people talk about any mental health difficulties they have, and we come to a kind of shared understanding of what the problem is, what might have started it, what's keeping it going, and then we help them think about what might make it better. So we don't really have all the answers, but it's only talking to the patients that we see that we start to understand, and they start to understand, actually, these are some of the things I could do. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we also do things like research, we do training and teaching, and we support lots of other professionals too.
When would a young person engage with a clinical psychologist?
So in our team, we have clinical psychologists, and we have other staff, clinical associates, and we have trainees and assistants. And so we have different levels of staff for different levels of problems. So the clinical psychologist would see the very complex cases, and our clinical associates would see people maybe who have slightly less complex difficulties, maybe things that have only just started happening. So we'll see things like depression, anxiety, people who've maybe had something traumatic happen, people who've got worries about things. And it's usually things that are happening at home as well as at school. I think you've already spoken to Linda Bigger, the educational psychology lead. So she will deal with things in schools. We tend to deal with things that are happening in the home environment. And we have specialist teams that work with babies, so our infant mental health team. We have people who work with children who are care experienced, and also those with medical conditions.
What would happen if someone had autism?
So yes, I forgot.
Would you do like a different method for them?
That's a really good question, and I forgot our neurodevelopmental team, and they'll be really cross with me. So I'm really sorry about that, guys. So we also have a specialist neurodevelopmental team. So it's not that we would do something different, but we would make sure we understood what were the particular issues for that person with autism. So say they found it really difficult to talk about their feelings, and maybe we would focus on other things like how they behave or how they're thinking. Or if they said, I'm really rubbish at talking about thinking, we would focus on feelings and other things. So we would do that for any young person, whether they had autism or not. But we have a specialist team who really understand the issues for people with autism, and so they can be really helpful to young people.
A few people with autism might be nonverbal. How do you help them out if they're nonverbal?
That's a really good question, because talking therapy is going to be really difficult, isn't it? So So we have our neurodevelopmental team, and we have another team, our intellectual disabilities team, who are really good at working with people who are nonverbal. And there's lots of creative approaches we can use, whether that's around drawing and other things that people can use to help them think about how they feel about things. But the other thing we'll do is support the people that are around them, like their family or their carers, to think about how they can support them when they're with them day to day.
How would a young person get referred to as a clinical psychologist?
So at the moment, we have what's called a single point of access with our CAMS colleagues. I'm sure you've heard of CAMS.
Yeah.
So rather than people having to be referred to two different teams, people can get referred into CAMS, and you can self-refer into CAMS, or you can be referred by your GP, your school nurse, your school, your youth worker. And CAMS would do a first phone call with you. And then if they think there's something we can do to help, we have a first assessment appointment. And if there's something that psychology can do to help, that appointment will be jointly between someone from psychology and someone from the CAMS team. And they would meet to talk about what you're worried about or what you're concerned about, and we would decide who's best to see you.
We are seeing lots of people on social media platforms providing advice and support around mental health. What would your advice be on how to navigate this?
So, yeah, there's lots of people full of really good advice, isn't there? Sometimes not so great advice. So I think the first thing I would do is I usually check out the qualifications of the person who's talking. So if they say they're a clinical psychologist or an educational psychologist, they have to be registered with an organisation called the Healthcare Professions Council. So you can go onto their website, HCPC, and you can check the register and see if that person's registered. Equally, if they're a nurse, they have to be registered with the NMC. Doctors have to be registered with the GMC. So lots of initials in there. But I'd be checking out the qualifications of the person and also their experience and background. Are they a professional, or are they someone who's talking to someone who's had some experience? Now, they've got just as much to offer in lots of ways, lots of experience. But we have to be careful that what works for one person doesn't always work for somebody else. So one person might say, been really, really anxious, and it helps me not to go to school and stay at home and pet my dog. Well, that might work really well for them, but that might not work well for you. And I'm not sure your school would be very happy if you weren't there. So I think it's just be careful what you hear and see on social media. The other thing that social media does, and it's very clever, is that the more you look at certain things, the more it shows you that sort of thing. So you're likely to see some very similar content.
I think it's called requested algorithm or something like that.
Oh, wow. Okay. That sounds probably right. But yes, it seems to work out, doesn't it? The more you watch a certain type of thing, it shows you more of that.
Yeah, like if you're on Amazon and you search up like a guitar, it'll keep showing you guitars.
I know, and it's really scary, isn't it? When you look up something and then next you get all these pop-up ads for very similar things. It's like they can read your mind. But the problem with that is, so say you're looking at something, some content that maybe isn't great, the more you look at that, the more it'll show you those sorts of things. And then it means you don't really get a balanced view. You don't get to see other more positive things that other people might want you to see. So that's why it's always important to have a balance around social media. The other things I'd say is there are some really good websites out there with lots of advice. So really recognised charities like Young Minds, they've got a really good website with lots of fantastic information. The CAMS website is really good. And I think the final thing I'd say about that is you don't need to give money to anyone. The NHS is free, okay? You don't have to pay for it. So if somebody's asking you to give them money for advice or things, you don't need to do that. You can come and see us completely for free.
What are your top tips for helping young people maintain and stabilise their mental health if they're going through something rough?
We could talk about this for about an hour, but I'll try and keep it brief. Okay, so it's really important you have really good basic habits. And there'll be people listening who'll go, oh my God, you sound just like my mum, Louise. But yes, sometimes mums have good advice. So getting into a good sleep routine. So, making sure you get to bed at a reasonable time, get a good block of sleep at one time. So not little patches of sleep, good chunks of sleep. Make sure you're eating well. Make sure you're drinking plenty of water. You've got to stay hydrated. Keeping an eye on how much time you're on social media, like we've just talked about. Making sure you connect with other people. So it's really important to have some relationships with others, even if it's just very brief or just a very brief friendship, but trying to connect with at least one person each day. The other thing I'd suggest is having some physical activity in your day is really important, even if it's just going out for a quick walk. And having a goal, having something achievable that you can look forward to doing. One of the things that psychologists suggest people do is they have a balance in their day between things you like doing and things that you're good at or give you a sense of achievement. Okay. So it might be that you really like lying in bed all day, playing computer games, right? That's not necessarily really good for you, but it's something we like doing. And equally, you might be really, really good at academic stuff, but studying all the time isn't good for you either, is it? Mm-hmm. So you need to balance the two. So making sure you're doing things that you're good at and things that you enjoy doing.
Thank you for that.
Thank you for being with us today. We've really enjoyed talking with you. Before we finish up, we would like to know what you love most about your job and any tips to young people there that might be considering a career as a clinical psychologist.
So what do I love about my job? I think I'm actually quite nosy, and I just really like hearing about other people's lives and what they're up to. But also it's a real privilege because I get to hear all the really difficult things in people's lives. I get to be the person that they trust and confide in. And sometimes people have never told anyone these things before. So it's a real privilege to sit with someone and hear their story and be able to help them. And I love that when I see a young person that maybe I saw a while ago and they're doing really well. I absolutely love that. What was the last part of the question? I've forgotten.
Do you have any tips for young people out there that might be considering a career as a clinical psychologist?
Well, we'd love you to come and work as a clinical psychologist. So you need to have some good grades, like hires are really important. So you need to have a mixture of sciences and arts, and you need to then go and do a degree in psychology. Once you're into your psychology degree, we offer work placements in our team. So once you're into about the second year, you can come along and do a work placement in our department in the NHS, and we can help you think about next steps. But the first step is to get really good grades. If you get really good grades in hires, you can go straight into a university to do an undergraduate degree in psychology. If maybe you don't get great grades or you haven't got them all in 1 year, because that's the thing now, isn't it? You have to do them all in one sitting. You can go via an access course. So you can do a social sciences access course and then move on into the degree course, which I think is really great because who can do all those really hard exams in 1 year? So there are a few avenues in, but having some experience of mental health is really important. So maybe doing some volunteering, having a support worker job, whether it's in the NHS or in communities, or just doing some community volunteering is a really helpful experience to have.
Thank you. That's the end of today's podcast. We want to thank Louise for joining us, and be sure to follow us on all social media platforms for next week's episode.
Fantastic. Thank you. It's been great. Thank you very much.
Follow us to keep up with more podcasts.